Why watermelon?
It can produce, especially if the watermelon is ripe, it can actually produce more tyramine, which is the same thing that people tend to watch out for in like cheese or some other foods. And so tyramine can be a trigger for sure for some people. And interesting that watermelon, the riper it is, the more delicious watermelons are, but also unfortunately sounds like the higher chance of it causing a migraine for some people, obviously.
I've heard a lot about triggers. Maybe you could just run through what some common triggers, and then a follow-up question to that is that do we really know if these are triggers? Is there a causal link? It sounds like some of these things, it might just be a craving, and yet we associate, a food item, which is what I most often hear as a trigger. We associate that with causing a migraine.
Yeah, so this was as I was reviewing this topic for the internal discussions we've been having. I was pretty interested to learn more about this. So this is definitely a little bit new to me because certainly in medical school and through like my training, you have these conversations with patients where you talk about what could have been the trigger, and so you kind of almost maybe even lead patients into it, right? Because you're like looking at like, oh, why did the migraine happen this time? Like, what can we help you prevent in the future? And then, as we're discharging you, once we feel better, we basically say like, okay, well, don't do that thing that you did that brought you here to the emergency department, which is like, oh yeah, thanks, super helpful, right?
It's kind of like the doctor, it hurts when I go like this, and you say, well, stop doing that.
Stop doing that. Which is always super useful advice for patients. You're like, how much do I owe you? But a lot of people will describe, or a lot of people have been told to watch out for different triggers of their migraines. So for some people, it will be alcohol, which, frankly makes sense to me, chocolate or cheese, sometimes citrus or sweeteners or like caffeinated beverage. I had a caffeine withdrawal headache one time, I'm pretty sure, and that was maybe as close as I've gotten to a migraine, but that was pretty awful. So caffeine obviously is, the most popular drug in America, people like to say. Some of it might be just related to what the neurotransmitters in the food are. So cheese, for example, has a lot of tyramine, which is a neurotransmitter. And so there's a lot of maybe like guesses about how what you eat and different neurotransmitters are related. So that might be one of the things. But we also went through this study where it was really fascinating. They looked at people who have migraines and eat certain things. And guess what? If you eat chocolate every day and you also have migraines, the chance that you had a migraine after you ate chocolate is 100% because you will always have eaten chocolate in the day before. And likewise, if you never have chocolate and never eat migraines, chocolate will never be a trigger for you because you don't eat chocolate or have migraines. So it might be a little bit more complicated than these being triggers as to just being a coincidence. So they call it this association causation fallacy, right? If I work out every day and I get a migraine after I work out, is it that I'm working out, or is it that I just happen to get a migraine and I work out every day,
Right. It could be a total correlation causation issue, but it sounds like it could be even more difficult to separate in that perhaps I have a craving for something before I get a migraine. It's not that the thing I'm craving causes the migraine. It's just, it's almost like it's predictive, but not causal.
Right. So that was one of the, yeah, exactly. That's one of the things they were talking about as well, is that, as we kind of went over, this prodrome could be, 48 hours in advance. And so your body might be triggered into craving certain things, of which, chocolate or caffeine or fruit or whatever might be the thing that you are triggered into craving. And thus you wanting to eat them is not what causes the migraine, but is actually reflective of the fact that you are going to have one anyways. So it's pretty fascinating, and I imagine frustrating for people who are suffering from migraines.
So watermelon, really fascinating that was, I think, on the top of the list in terms of being identified as a trigger. Why watermelon?
So watermelon is, I mentioned this chemical before, but it can produce, especially if the watermelon is ripe, it can actually produce more tyramine, which is the same thing that people tend to watch out for in like cheese or some other foods. And so tyramine can be a trigger for sure for some people. And interesting that watermelon, the riper it is, the more delicious watermelons are, but also unfortunately sounds like the higher chance of it causing a migraine for some people, obviously.
Got it. What about alcohol? Should I be abstaining from alcohol if I have migraines? Do we know enough yet?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I will say as a doctor, I always encourage people to abstain from alcohol. Certainly, wine can have a little bit more of the chemicals that might trigger migraines. Um, and then, it's a pretty common thing for migraine triggers. It also, you sleep worse, you can be dehydrated. So it might be a little bit more multifactorial as to why it causes triggers or triggers migraines. But again, I'm not going to say you can't have a glass of champagne on New Year's or whatever if that's something that you want to do. You just have to weigh the risk and benefits of it's a common migraine trigger for you. Most people would probably just avoid it out of the desire to not have migraines.
Right. And of all the alcoholic beverages, wine would be probably the most problematic.
I think it does tend to have a little bit more of the kind of chemically active compounds in it that can kind of maybe trigger migraines. But I don't know that I'm not a brewer. So
Okay.
I don't know the
You
official
may not know
one.
the answer to this one, but red or white? Have
I
any
mean,
idea? I'm guessing
probably
red,
red
but I
wine,
don't.
right?
Yeah.
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 I mean,
Okay.
so there's classes of medications, these MAOI inhibitors that are mostly they've stopped using, but were used commonly um, for psychiatric conditions. And one of the things that you couldn't have when you were on them was because of the interaction they had with red wine, because it would really increase the amount of neurotransmitters and it can cause toxicity actually from the medications. So
That's the one medication I've heard on every television disclaimer for a pharmaceutical. Don't take this if you're taking MOI inhibitors.
yeah, it's a
So
pretty
good
classic
information.
kind of board question. Is this person's on some medication and they go to a wine and cheese party and then they end up in the emergency department very, very sick?
Yeah. Wow. Now I want to get to the question I think a lot of our listeners want to hear about, and that is there a connection between glucose, plasma glucose, and migraines?
Yes, and not just plasma glucose, but again, how your body reacts to all of these inputs and stimulus and itself, um, and so if you look at plasma glucose while people are having migraines, in this one study there during migraine with and without aura, their glucose went up by 10 to 15 points kind of spontaneously. And again, this is, is it because you're eating things right before that that triggered a migraine? If it's chocolate or watermelon, it could have a high glucose level in it. But it might be
Or
a
could
little
it
bit,
be gluconeogenesis? It could be,
yeah, or stress, your body
yeah.
overall stress. One of the kind of potential interactions there is this idea of like local insulin resistance. So if your body is stressed and your brain is kind of under attack, you might have a higher insulin resistance in your body in order to kind of take that glucose that would be maybe used by your muscles or whatever and help it go to your brain so that your brain has a little bit more of this energy. So you might see kind of a peripheral glucose increase, even though your brain is the one that's actually using that glucose, if that makes sense. But if you look at people who have migraines, even in people who are younger, non-obese, non-diabetic, and have normal blood pressure, so a healthy young person, people who suffer from migraines or migraineurs might have higher levels of insulin resistance in general, which is pretty fascinating.
Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tap the bell icon to be the first to get more videos like this one, and stay connected with Signals.